Hello again, everybody. This is Chris with Overclockers Club. We've got something cool from Cooler Master. This is the new V850i Gold from Cooler Master. You can see it's an 80 plus gold rated power supply, 10-year warranty. Let's see, PCIe 5.0, 12 VHPWR connector. We'll certainly go over that here in a little bit because that is very relevant given the new 40 series graphics cards from Nvidia. All right, let's look at the box in more detail. I'll have to figure out what this is right here. STCM. I'm not sure exactly what that is, so I'll have to look into that. But looking at the back, let's see what is interesting. Okay, Master Plus software. Okay, so you're using software to actually, I don't know, monitor or control the power supply. That'll be interesting. Now, using software for this purpose is nothing new, but it is new to me. I have not experienced that, so I'll have to have some fun playing with that. So we've got brand new, refreshing V Gold series design, fully compliant PCIe Gen 5 application, so that will definitely come in handy. 100% Japanese capacitors for stability and reliability. Smart thermal control mode creates more silent experience via Master Plus software. So again, that'll be fun to look into that. Digital housekeeping design creates more precise monitoring and protection. So looks like it's all part of the Master Plus software. And then let's see, flip that around. Okay, so we've got the fan curve here, and again, like what they're saying here is they've tested it at an ambient of 25 degrees Celsius, selected silent mode through the Master Plus software. So basically what you've got here is the fan does not function, it's just quiet and not moving at all, till you get to, it looks like 50% load. So at this point we've generated enough heat that the fan will come on, and then it maxes out as far as RPMs, a little under 1500, and they're showing here the decibels when the fan is at its maximum. It looks like it's at or below 35. So what they're saying here basically is the fan's really quiet. Efficiency, usually around 50% is where you get your maximum efficiency, and it looks like this curve actually your maximum efficiency is just a little bit down from 50%. It looks like more like 40%. So what that means is when you're sizing your power supplies, and Cooler Master does have a nice PSU utility there that you can sort of select the size of your power supply to make sure you got the right one based on your system configuration. But the general rule is, you think bigger is better. So if you're building a system that only needs 750 watts, if you put a 1,000 watt power supply on there, that's better. That's not really the case where you're going to get the maximum efficiency. You really want to size your power supply based on the loads that your system will see to get the maximum efficiency. So over here, we've got 135 millimeter silent fan, typical efficiency greater than or equal to 90%. The connectors, I'll go over all these when we open it up and show all the cables and the connectors. So we've got a single 12 volt rail here. We've got a maximum of 70.8 amps on that for a total of 850 watts. Okay, so that pretty much covers the box, but let's check out the manufacturer website here because sometimes there's a key feature or a point that I miss. So let's make sure I didn't. I can see right away, here's the STCM I was wondering about earlier. That stands for Smart Thermal Control Mode. It does have a 10-year warranty. That's pretty impressive. I've had power supplies go over 10 years. I've actually had a few of them. PCIe 5.0. Now this is probably the biggest news in the power supply world. We've got 12 volt high power connector. This you're going to see more and more on power supplies in order to power your Nvidia graphics cards. Now you probably won't see it on power supplies really much below 850 watts because of the requirements that these newer graphics cards have. at least not for your 4080, 4090, 4070. When we see the lower series come out, the lower 4060s, 4050s, we may see a lower threshold on the power, and we may see power supplies in the 550, 650 range. We'll just have to see where that ends up. This is all stuff we covered on the box. Yeah, we've got a special USB connection from the power supply to the motherboard so that you don't really control it, but you monitor your power supply, which we'll see later. Fully support ATX 3.0. Again, that's your 12 volt high power connector. And it says it can support a peak power up to 200% more than the rated power. So that's just if you get basically a spike, it can handle a pretty significant spike. 135 millimeter fan. Let's see, that's about it there. Here's your PSU calculator. This is nice because, let's see what happens. Okay, yeah, so you put in your basic information on your system, and this will give you a recommendation on what power supplies are best to use based on the information that you input here. So it's interesting that you can get excited about a power supply now, because it used to be, power supply was just a box with a bunch of wires coming out of it, and it supplied power to your system, and that was it. But a little different story these days. Oh, that's nice. Look at that. It's in a nice little fabric bag. That's nice. I like these things, but it seems kind of sad to just use it once, because it's going to spend the rest of its life in the box. Anyway, so there's the unit. Let me go ahead and get the rest of the stuff out here. And that's really about it inside the box. All right. So the unit itself, it's got some weight to it. 135 millimeter fan, so that fan takes up every bit of the top. Some pretty good size openings there. When you mount your power supply in your case, you can mount it up. Most people usually mount it down so it pulls the air in from the bottom. But if you do mount it up, be really careful that you don't drop any screws or anything in here. If you do any work, make sure everything is powered off, and cover this so that nothing falls in. And if you do accidentally drop something and it goes into your power supply, take the power supply out, shake it, whatever you have to do to get it out of there. Do not leave it in there, and don't think you'll come back later, because it's real easy to forget. Okay, so anyway, so there's the side that has the nice, it's like an inlaid section. Boy, that's nice. It's like a brushed gold. I don't know if you can get the full effect there, but that is really nice. Cooler Master logo. The whole back of it here, this is where your air exits, your hot air, and it's vented pretty much the entire thing. Everywhere you can vent it is vented. Let's see, your specifications again are right here for the power usage, and over here is where all the action happens. Okay, so you can see here we've got dedicated connectors. And again, this is a fully modular power supply. So what we've got here, here's a communications port. So that tells me that there's a connector in here, probably a USB connector. Actually, let me take a quick look at that. I was going to look at that later, but let's just go ahead and do it now. So we've got some plastic cable ties. And we've got some Velcro straps there for part of your cable management. We've got some screws there to mount your power supply in the case. Here's your main power cord, and this is pretty thick. These are usually, let's see, what gauge is it? 14 AWG, so pretty thick, heavy duty. All right. Like this is all sealed. So I cut the bag open there. so there should be, yeah, there we go. So there's the USB connector, like I figured. So this is what enables the communication from your power supply to the motherboard and to the controlling software. So I'm sure I'll have to get that all downloaded. Okay, actually inside the box was this installation guide, so yeah, there it shows you how to connect that to the motherboard. Something you don't usually do with a power supply, but in this case. Now this walks through your all your connectors on your main power connector if you want to know basically what each pin does, whether it's a common or ground, or it has power. So that's nice, especially if you're trying to do troubleshooting. And it looks like this is, yeah, multiple languages. Typically you don't need to refer to that, but it's good to keep around. Okay, so let's see, we've got quite a few cables, so let me get these all laid out. Okay, so I got these organized so we can sort of walk through them. All right, so the first thing that kind of caught my attention, it actually comes with Molex connectors. You know, when's the last time you used anything that had a Molex connector on it? It's a good thing because, you know, when you come across it and you need one, they're pretty much extinct, but there you go. You've got a Molex connector. Again, this is your USB connector for your communications to your motherboard. These are your CPU power, so we've got a single dedicated 8-pin right there, and then we've got a second one, it's 2 4s. So some motherboards, you know, you only need 1 4, but you can push those together and get an 8-pin connector if your motherboard requires it. We've got several SATA connectors, so this plugs into your power supply. And then these are the ends that you can use for hard drives, supplying power to the case if you've got like RGB effects, things like that. So each one of these has 4 SATA sockets on it, or SATA plugs, I guess. So you've got 1, 2, looks like 3 of these, and these are all 4. So you got a total of 12 SATA connections. These are your PCIe connectors, so these are, and again, it's nice it says CM PSU, so that tells you this end goes to the PSU, or your power supply. So we've got a 6+2, another 6+2, and another 6+2, so you got 3 of these. These are typically what go to your graphics cards, unless you're using one of the newer Nvidia, and that's where this guy comes into play. And you can see right there it says 450 watts. This is the end that would go to the graphics card, and this end, actually they look identical. Okay, so I guess it doesn't matter. So they're both marked with 450 watts. And let's see, oh, I didn't go over the main one. So this is what goes to your motherboard that supplies all of your mothers. This is, or your power to your motherboard. So this is a 24-pin connector. So these 2 here go back to the power supply. And then now we'll take a look at the power supply. So we have these dedicated connectors here. These are for your SATA connections. This is the main power. Actually, these 2 here for your motherboard. Here's your 12VH PWR for your graphics card, if you've got an Nvidia graphics card, 40 series. And then we've got our standard 8-pin connectors here for your PCIe connections. So that pretty much covers that. It does have a power switch. Now some power supplies will have an additional switch for like your 0 RPM mode, but that is all handled through the software. So we've seen what the outside looks like, but for anyone who is curious as to what the inside looks like, here's a picture from the Cooler Master website. I was going to take the cover off myself and show you, but this picture is as good as anything I can show you by taking the cover off. Now, If you're an electronics type of person, then you know what capacitors and transformers and resistors look like in here, and this all makes sense to you. If you're not into that kind of stuff, then really all you care about is plug it in and turn it on, and does it power up my system? That's really the only concern you've got. So now you know what the inside looks like. All right, so now we'll get the test system put together. We'll be using the Cooler Master Cosmos C700P Black Edition case. It is a very large case, which you will see here shortly. First, let's go over the specifications for the test system. The test system will consist of a MSI Z690 Carbon Wi-Fi DDR5 motherboard. The CPU we'll be using is the i7-12700KF. From Intel, the cooler is the Cooler Master PL360 Flux. The graphics card is the very large and very powerful Nvidia RTX 4090. Memory will be using 32 gigabytes of Kingston Fury Beast. The power supply, of course, is the Master V850i Gold. The case, again, is the Cosmos C700P Black Edition, and we'll be using Windows 11 for the operating system. And we'll get the power supply installed. Again, this is the V850i. And you can put it with the fan facing up or down. And just be careful if you do put it with the fan facing up during the assembly process. Make sure you don't drop anything in there. It's a good idea to just cover this thing with some tape, packing tape, or just something to cover it to keep anything from going in there. And then when you're ready to fire your system up, take the tape off. But I will, in this case, install it with the fan down. Now the only thing is this nice side applique is going to be pretty much obscured, mostly obscured here by the side support, but no big deal. There'll be a shroud over this anyway, so I guess even if that was exposed, you couldn't really see it. Now, it's also a good idea to go ahead and get your cables, figure out which cables you need while everything's open, and get those routed. And the system build is almost complete. Here you can see the power supply installed. The side bracket sort of obscures the side of the power supply. Sometimes you have a power supply that's kind of fancy and you want to show it off. And in this situation, this bracket would prevent that, at least partially. But actually that doesn't matter at all because there's a large power supply shroud that covers this whole area. We'll see that here in a little bit. But this is a good time to make sure you have all the right cables plugged in and routed, especially your graphics card cable, your power to your graphics card. And if you're using a late model Nvidia graphics card, such as the RTX 4090, for example, you want to make sure you use this cable and that it is plugged in completely. Try not to bend it. Do not stress it here in the area where the wiring goes into the plug. And when you plug it in, it's a little hard to see, but right there you can see that the plug is fully seated into the socket on the graphics card. There should be no gap right there in that area. And when you push it in, you'll feel it click, and you should hear a click also. That's the tab on the back here that's engaging to lock it in there. But just pay special attention when you plug that in. So as I was saying, make sure you've got all the right cables plugged in, and it may not be a bad idea. This is a really popular cable for a lot of devices. This is your SATA power. It has 4 SATA plugs available. But it might not be a bad idea to go ahead and plug this in, and then you can just leave this, you know, sitting down here in the bottom, so if you need it in the future, it's already there. Something else to mention, in this particular case, you can see the bottom filter panel there. Well, it comes out for cleaning. So if you have any wires dangling down, they can get caught in that. So it's a good idea to go ahead and get your wires tied up and out of the way at this point. And I have them tied up, so it just takes a few seconds. So now when I go to remove this panel, none of the wires will get in the way. Now, a lot of cases will have a solid metal bottom floor, and if there's any filter panel, it will be below that, so it's not an issue. I'm just saying in this particular case, since the filter panel is essentially the floor, just make sure the wires aren't getting in the way. And the power supply shroud is in 2 pieces, and you can see right away that here shortly the power supply will be completely covered up. And the top piece screws in there like that. There's some tabs on the bottom here that have to line up with these slots. Once you get them lined up, it should slide right into position. Nope, not quite. Let's try that again. There we go. All right. So now I'll just finish getting the screws in there. And coming around to the back side here, you can see the power supply. You can sort of get to the cables, but you really need to get in there and get that power supply shroud out from the front if you want to go in there and make any changes to your cables. Now, some cases, these are like riveted in, they're like permanent, you can't really get them out of the way. So that's why it's important to make sure you've got all of your cables that you're going to be using plugged in before you get the power supply shoved into the case. And this to me is the fun part. We're going to look at the software, the Master Plus software that you use to interface with your power supply. So you go to your power supply homepage up here under support. When you mouse over that, you can see you get the option for Master Plus. And when you click that, it should open a new window. And there's the download link for the software. And you want to get that downloaded and installed. And usually the first thing it does is check your system for any related hardware that needs a firmware update. So we may see that. And that's exactly what happened here. It found some firmware on the motherboard that controls the ARGB. Needed to be updated, so that's what it will do. You can see here in the update process, you have to hit connect, and after it connects, then you have to hit the program button, and it goes through and erases, and then it rewrites the firmware to the motherboard. Okay, so when you fire up the software, this is the screen that you first come to. Now, I only have, if you look over here, there are two devices that show up. The controller for the RGB, and of course the power supply. And if you have other Cooler Master components that work with this software, they would populate over here. But as you can see, I only have two of the devices currently. And when you click on either one, so this is how you get in and control the RGB lighting and do the setup, and you can adjust the lighting effects, but we are working with the power supply today. And let me zoom in a little better here so you can kind of see what's going on up here in the corner. This is sort of where all the action is happening, if I can get my camera to stabilize. All right, so you can see at the top we've got VAC, which is your voltage in. You got your amps, so V is volts, I is amps. Then you've got your power in, P in right here. So currently, and it varies from moment to moment, but 75 watts, 90 watts, 116 watts, that's the power in. Right next to that is the power out. So you could sort of consider this your efficiency, power in over power out. But this is sort of looks like it checks every 2 or 3 seconds. Then you've got your fan. Over here you can look at your fan RPM, your fan speed, and then the mode that you're in. Right now we're in 0 RPM mode, which is silent mode. And that's good up to a certain temperature or load, and we'll see that here in just a moment. Over here you can look at your voltage and amperage right here on a graph, and we can switch over here to the current. You can see the current varies a little bit, the voltage is a little more stable. Now when I come over here to the output, I have to move the camera over a little bit so we can get everything in there. Over here we can look at the 12 volt on the output, 5 volt and the 3.3. So you can look at the voltage and the amperage currently. Now there's no real load on the system, so everything is pretty stable. Our temperature right now is 29 to 30 degrees Celsius, and you can adjust that from Celsius to Fahrenheit. And over here on the upper right is, this is actually where, if we look at, so you can turn your system configuration off. You can hit the little wrench symbol up there, and it brings us up so you can change your language if you want. This is all fairly simple. And you can tell it to either launch on system startup, minimize to tray on close. You can make those adjustments there. Now also, we move down just a little bit, you have the ability to log your system information. So right here you can start and stop the log, and I'll show you what the log looks like here. So this just basically is tracking, and there's a lot here, so I'm going to have to move around with the camera so you can really see everything. But you've got the date, the time, the voltage, the current, power in, power out, 12 volt in, 12 volt out. And you can see it just goes all the way over to the far right down to the fan speed. So this is a way to sort of log what's going on with your system. It helps if you're doing troubleshooting or if you just want to see what's happening with your system as you use it under various loading conditions, for example. And again, this is the configuration tab. If we look over here on the configuration tab, this is where you can check your firmware. So over here is your software revision, your firmware version. You can change the device name if you want. And we'll look at the input over here one more time. So every time you click one of these, you get a different graph that shows down here. So for example, this is the voltage and the current in that we already looked at initially. This is the power in, so you can come over here and look at the watts in versus watts out. And there's a nice graph here that you can follow. The fan here, when you click this, now this is where you can adjust your fan mode. Now you can see right now it is in the silent mode. So there's your fan curve. So you can see nothing is happening. 10% load, 20, 30, 40. When we get to 50%, then the fan kicks up to 40% fan speed. And then we've got the little tiers where it jumps up based on the load. So you can see for that setting, and again, this is 0 RPM mode. So most of the time, or silent mode, most of the time your system is going to operate down in this zone. So your fan will not be running. Doesn't need to. The next mode over here, if you click it, this is your standard mode. And if you notice, your fan curve here, or your profile, shifts a little to the right. So we have a baseline fan always being on, so we don't have a 0 RPM mode. So it sets by default to 650 RPMs, which is pretty much inaudible. And then you can see where it kicks up here at the different power usage tiers. And then if we come over here and look at the gaming mode, it also has a slightly different profile there. But again, it is always on. There's a baseline amount that the fan is always running, so you never have to worry about it not running. And then we've got overclock mode. And you can see the fan curve is pegged all the way at the top. So it's going to run at full speed. And you can actually hear the fan now, because it's running at, let's see, 2110 RPMs right now. That's the maximum. So I'm standing 2-3 feet away from the case and I can hear it. So let's move the fan around to the back. Of course, you would expect to hear it when it's running at full speed. Come around to the back. And yeah, there's quite a bit of air coming out of the back. And then on the inside of the case, of course, the fan is facing down, so I won't really feel anything here. It's not drawing any air in from the top. But you can definitely hear it in overclock mode. Of course, that's when you're going to be using the maximum power, so that just ensures that the fan is running at 100% and you get the maximum cooling. So in that mode right now with the fan on, it dropped. We were running close to 30C and it's down to 23C right now. And then finally we have a customize mode. And this is where you can actually adjust the fan curve yourself. So you can adjust basically what power level and what speed the fan runs at. I think you can click on these. Let's see how this works. Yeah, you can move them up and down, drag them up and down. So you have a little bit of control there. And then you hit apply. There's also a reset, so you bring it back down to the factory defaults. So this is a cool way to interact with your power supply, where in the past most power supplies had no way to do this. You just had to look at your power supply and see if the fan was running or not, and that was the only indication you had of what was going on with your power supply. But again, cool way to monitor it and see what's going on. All right, now we're stressing the system using Prime 95 to stress the CPU and folding it home to stress the GPU. Sort of pull as many watts through there as we can right now, and it varies. I've seen this peak around 750 watts. Seems to vary a little bit. Fan mode, we're in silent mode, and we're running at 880 RPMs in the silent mode, so that tells me the power draw is enough to pull the RPMs up on the fan. And our temperature is 23 degrees Celsius. It seems to be holding at that. It hasn't really changed since I've been running this. And just for the heck of it, I think I'll see what happens when I run some 3D Mark benchmarking while I'm doing the folding at home, to see what effects that has on the GPU stress. Okay, so we're running the benchmark. I hear some fans kicking up in speed, so we must be really stressing something in there. So everything's back to normal speed, but the additional fan noise was actually from the power supply fan kicking it up due to the extra stress of having to deliver the additional power to the graphics card, as well as the graphics card fans that it also kicked up to get rid of some heat. Okay, looking at the numbers that were logged, I'd say we definitely pulled some serious wattage there. 826 watts in, 735 out. Our temperatures and fan speed, looks like the fan had to kick on to the max, well, almost max, 1320 RPMs to bring the temperature, or keep the temperature down, and it looks like it did. It held it around 24°C, but it was running originally 880 RPMs on the initial testing, and then when we kicked in the 3D Mark benchmarking, clearly that put a bigger load on the system. So my thoughts on the V850i Gold. I think this is an early box. It may say Multi on it somewhere else as I knock everything down. It's not on Amazon or Newegg just yet, but it will be here real soon. Retail is $184.99. And yeah, that's a little salty for a power supply, but this is a little more than just a standard power supply. And it becomes increasingly more important when you're running the latest graphics cards, especially the 40 series here from Nvidia, to have the horsepower to drive those cards and the connectors. And we're going to be seeing these more and more commonly on power supplies. But back to being more than just a power supply, you've got the software that you can use to get in and monitor and see what's going on. So you can't do that with most standard power supplies. And you know, it's a lot of fun to be able to do that. I admit it's somewhat of a novelty, just like RGB. You know, once you get in there and set it up and play around with it a little bit, you know, do you get in there and fool with it every day? Probably not, but it is nice to have. You've got the 10-year warranty. That's also very important on a power supply. Every time I've ever had an issue with a power supply, all the manufacturers I've dealt with have always stood behind their power supplies, and that of course includes Cooler Master. So overall, I am really impressed with this power supply. I would give it the Overclockers Club Editor's Choice Award. So this is Chris with Overclockers Club. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.